Welcome back to Redline Global, a collaborative venture between SAMAA in Pakistan and SEN in Lebanon. Both teams are now devoted to bringing to you an exciting debate about a very important issue. We live in a world of nuclearized world. Let me give you some data here. There are about 12,241 nuclear warheads on the planet. Of those, 9,614 are in military stockpiles, ready or near ready for use. As I speak to you, about 3,912 are deployed right now. And as I speak to you, about 2,100 sit on high operational alert. Most of those are held by the US and Russia. 9 countries have nuclear weapons. Russia leads with about 5,500 warheads. The US follows with about 5,000. Both control 90% of the global nuclear arsenal. China has roughly about 600, France 290, the UK 225. India has about 180 warheads, Pakistan has about 170. Israel maintains some sort of a nuclear ambiguity, but it has about 90 warheads. North Korea has around 50, which it built after withdrawing from NPT in 2003. The big question facing the upcoming non-nuclear regional powers is whether to go nuclear or simply put faith in traditional methods of securing their interests. Experts, however, think that we can potentially have half a dozen new nuclear states in the next 10 years. Is that how it's going to be, or will the world turn out to be different? We have a panel here in Islamabad and Lahore, and we will also be engaged with a panel in Beirut. Let me go to Beirut, where Sahil is waiting to share some interesting data with you.
Thanks, Talat, for that. Yes, it's now time to talk about nuclear weapons. The world is rearming, not quietly, not slowly. Nuclear powers are expanding their arsenals. New military technologies are emerging faster than any treaty can track them. And the guardrails that prevented the last century's rivalries from ending in catastrophe are under enormous strain. History remembers wars by the technology that defined them. Tonight, let's take a look at historical evolution. 1914, remember, brought industrial war, machines, trenches, and mass production turned battlefields into factories of death. 1945 changed everything. It changed the world forever with nuclear war. One flash, one bomb, and humanity entered the atomic age. 1991 marked the risk of unipolar power. The Cold War ended, and a single superpower shaped the global order. But now in 2026, the battlefield is changing again. And not just tanks, not just missiles, algorithms, artificial intelligence, information manipulation, autonomous systems. We have entered a new era of warfare where wars are fought not only on land and sea, but inside networks, narratives, and the human mind itself. We call it the algorithmic warfare. The question is whether we have the wisdom to survive it. In fact, let's go back to those graphics. The second point there, about 1945, that's when nuclear war took place for the first time. But that was 1945, and we are in 2026, and still that danger remains. In fact, when the 2025 India-Pakistan conflict broke out last year, much of the West panicked about nuclear escalation. World that they thought that the two South Asian nuclear rivals would just destroy each other, and with them the rest of the world. So is there any truth to the West's perennial nuclear panic, or is this an Orientalist gaze from predominantly first world nuclear powers who want to maintain their military superiority over nations from the global South? Angad Singh reports from New York City.
Whenever the two countries are in conflict, the same warnings return. This fear-mongering has always come with a subtext. If nuclear weapons spread beyond the West, the entire world would be in danger. But here's the strange part. India and Pakistan have now both had nuclear weapons for more than 25 years. And yet, the nuclear apocalypse that headlines have predicted and world leaders cautioned against never quite came. What if nuclear weapons in the global South don't actually make the world less safe, but move regional conflicts towards stability instead? So to understand this debate, we need to go back to the beginning of the nuclear age. In 1945, the United States became the first, and briefly the only, country with nuclear weapons. But that monopoly didn't last. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first nuclear weapon, which began a Cold War arms race. And over the next 2 decades, Britain, France, and China also developed nuclear weapons. And by the 1960s, world leaders feared the technology might spread beyond this small group. So in 1968, governments got together and negotiated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. On paper, the treaty aimed to stop nuclear proliferation, but it also formally recognized just 5 countries as legitimate nuclear powers: the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and China. These are the same 5 states that hold permanent seats on the UN Security Council. And many in the global south saw this system as one of nuclear apartheid. India, Pakistan, and Israel never signed this agreement. And in 1974, India conducted what it called a peaceful nuclear explosion, triggering international condemnation. And then, in 1998, India carried out 5 nuclear tests as part of Operation Shakti, and Pakistan responded with 5 tests of its own within weeks. In 1999, as the 2 countries fought the Kargil War along the disputed Kashmir border, major papers were warning that nuclear danger looms large and that the region was the most dangerous place on Earth. But something like the opposite happened. The war actually remained fairly limited. In fact, the 3 largest wars between India and Pakistan happened before nuclearization, and after Kargil, India and Pakistan have not fought another full-scale war. However, there have been crises. Each time, fears of nuclear war returned. And to be fair, those warnings didn't just come from Western media. In the years since, the story of a nuclear-armed India and Pakistan has challenged the long-standing assumptions of the nuclear world order. The 2 countries have shown us that indeed, nuclear weapons can increase risk. But paradoxically, that risk can also force bitter rivals to limit just how far violence goes if and when conflict breaks out. And when Western voices inevitably suggest that countries in the global south are more likely to destroy the entire world in nuclear conflict, it's worth asking, is their fear actually grounded in history? Or is this anxiety about something else entirely?
All such excellent reports are available on South Era Network's YouTube channel. Talat, back to you.
Thank you very much. Most interesting debate generated by the report seems to suggest that those who are the lesser children of the nuclear world, like Pakistan and India and others, are likely to create a cataclysmic situation, while the history records are clear that if there is one country that has ever used nuclear weapons twice, it happens to be the US. And the countries that have detonated and tested the nuclear weapons the most in terms of upgrading their capability happen to be Russia and the US. Russia has tested like 10,000 times and US has tested like 7,000 times. And as I explained as well, that the stockpiles of both these countries are in a state of high alert, 90% of them. So, you know, there is this side to this debate that whether this is, the shoe is really on the other foot when it comes to debating the nuclear issue. However, we need to look at the reality of the situation. And let me first introduce my guest, Michael Kugelman, one of the world's most renowned analyst, is with us. He's a senior fellow, South Asia Atlantic Council. Michael, thank you very much for being with us. Dana W. White, former representative of the Pentagon, thank you very much for being with us in this show. Let me start off with you, Michael, if you could tell us, is there a fear that after the Iran nuclear issue, a debate is starting in new regional powers that if they have nuclear weapons, perhaps their fate would be different from what Iran suffered, because many are arguing in Southwest Asia, in the Middle East, and you must have heard these arguments, that if Iran had detonated a nuclear device, perhaps things would have been different. And they quote the example of North Korea. Your take?
Well, first, thanks for having me, and thanks for the too kind introduction. Of course, nuclear issues have been a big part of the discussion around this Iran crisis and Iran conflict, because, of course, the Trump administration has said that it wants Iran to end its nuclear weapons development. But I would argue that the main focus at this point and the main concern has really been around the conflict itself and ending it and developing the right incentives to get both sides to talk and wrap up the war. I mean, I think it's very clear. I mean, I don't need to tell you or your audience that this is a war that has very significant and negative impacts for so many of Iran's neighbors, including Pakistan, perhaps especially, as well as so many other countries in Asia, the Middle East, and around the world. Of course, the main consequences being economic, those pertaining to energy. But broadly speaking, I would argue that so much of the world, with the exception of a few countries, have a strong interest in getting the belligerents to stop fighting and for the war to stop. So your question is, I think, an apt one, and there's always going to be concerns about that type of issue. But when it comes to the war in Iran right now, I'd say that the main focus is on ending the war, or at least getting the two sides to start talking again, to work toward off ramps and de-escalations.
Dana, this regional dynamic is also at work. Of course, the war needs to stop. There has to be a sane resolution to all of this. But there's a regional dynamic at work. Regional countries are, in the Gulf, for instance, looking for more weapon purchases. They're looking for iron domes. They're also looking for the ultimate guarantee that they believe comes with the nuclear weapons. Is there going to be a new rush for nuclear technology based on the events of the last 1 year, or do you think that they would draw the exact opposite lesson from the Iranian experience and say that the cost of pursuing nuclear ambitions is far too much?
I actually think that the war with Iran, and thank you for having me, actually would do the. I think the consequences of having a nuclear weapon have shown that the world doesn't need any more nuclear powers, and Iran is suffering, and the region's suffering because it has relentlessly pursued this capability, and the president is not going to let them have it. And so I think it does exactly the opposite. It is better not to have a nuclear weapon. I served in the Bush administration with North Korea and how people tiptoed around North Korea. This president is not going to tiptoe.
What more can he do to make sure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear potential or capability, considering that he has already obliterated it twice?
Well, I think it's not just the obliteration. Obviously, we need to get the enriched uranium, but we also have to kill the will to have it. Iran has to understand this is not a viable ambition for them. And so that's where either talks or Karg Island or escalation becomes the issue, that we can't, their ambitions have to go. It can't just be, okay, we'll stop for a bit.
Michael, how do you kill intent?
Well, I mean, to be quite honest, I think it'll be very difficult. I think that we can all agree that the world would be better without nuclear weapons. And of course, there's a number of countries that have nuclear weapons, including the US. But I think that in the case of Iran, it would take quite some time. And I think that the US would have to play a very long game in trying to develop the incentives to convince the Iranians to actually stop with their nuclear weapons program. I mean, my understanding is that that's essentially something close to a red line for the Iranians right now. And the administration would have to be prepared to make a significant number of major concessions to get to a point where Iran would be ready to make big concessions on its nuclear weapons program. I really think that we have to be pragmatic for now and focus on the immediate issues. There's no such thing as low-hanging fruit when it comes to a complex conflict like this. But I think that the focus needs to be on the Strait of Hormuz and ensuring that the Iranians provide access to that once again, and also on the U.S. naval blockade, ending that as well.
Dana, your take on this. North Korea can have nuclear weapons. Why can't Iran?
I think at the end of the day, it's very complicated. It won't be easy, but I think President Trump has actually shown a great deal of patience in a lot of this. But at some point, it comes down to economics, and they can't survive given the straits, given the blockade, at some point, something's got to give.
Yeah, but as I speak to you, Dana, just by way of information, about 2 to 3 dozen ships have passed for the Chinese consumption through the Strait of Hormuz after getting clearance from IRCG, and there seems to be some movement there, 30 ships to be precise. Michael, is more pressure the way to go about keeping the world less nuclearized? Or do you have to, at some point in time, given to the fact that regional powers will pursue their ambitions regardless of what the cost is, because they do believe that this remains an ultimate umbrella to protect them against the kind of situation that Iran faced with?
Well, Talat, as you know, it's been a very small number of countries that have developed nuclear weapons or have begun to develop them, and then decided to dismantle their programs altogether. Right, it's a very small number of cases, and all of these cases, the small number that there are, as I understand it, these were decisions that were made internally. They were not made based on pressure from the outside. They were not made based on military action from the outside. Nothing like that. And when it comes to Iran, I certainly am no fan of Iran. I agree with what the other speaker said about Iran. And so if you look at the history, Iran has faced a lot of pressure from the U.S. through sanctions, and it's faced a lot of pressure through other means and through other channels for many years. And rarely has it buckled, right? So in some ways, one could argue it's used to the pressure. And as much as we've seen significant levels of anger from the Iranian public against the current regime, including these protests that we saw earlier this year, I really do not assume that the Iranian public would agree to the idea of their government or their state dismantling their nuclear weapons program, especially because of a demand or pressure from the outside, and especially the United States, quite frankly.
Thank you very much, Michael, Dana. Thank you very much for your contributions. Great perspectives, competing perspectives, but important perspectives to share. Our transmission continues. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Redline Global Special. We will now take you to Lebanon, where my colleague Sahil is ready with his panelists. Sahil, you must have heard the debate before the break took place about whether Iran should or should not have nuclear weapons. It's very interesting. Where I'm sitting in South Asia, you understand better than anybody else, we have 3 nuclear powers. We have Pakistan, we've got India, we've got China. Where you're sitting right now, there is one nuclear power, that is Israel, and then there's one threshold power or potential power, that is Iran. But there can be more. As Saudi leadership has said, that if Iran goes nuclear, we are going to go nuclear. So over to you. I want to listen to what your perspective is and your panelist perspective is from the heart of the Middle East. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Talat. Yes, I was listening to Michael and Dana. Michael has very rightly pointed out that in a conflict like this, there is no low-hanging fruit. So it's an excruciating process of negotiations and diplomacy, and it will take its own sweet time. Now, twice in less than a year, the United States has bombed Iran's nuclear program. Twice it has said that threat is gone, but political scientists who study strikes like these are unambiguous. Bombing a country does not remove its desire for a nuclear weapon. It hardens it. Sarah Gill reports on whether America's campaign against Iran's nuclear ambitions is stopping proliferation or guaranteeing it.
Can the US-Israeli war actually end Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Yet just 8 months later, a massive joint US and Israeli mission launched another attack on Iran for the same reason. But here's what isn't being said. You can bomb a building, but you cannot destroy nuclear latency. That is, the technical, material, and intellectual capacity to build a nuclear weapon. And by attacking Iran, the US may be doing the exact opposite of what it intends, accelerating the very nuclear threat it says it wants to stop. Because now, in 2026, the war has escalated. US and Israeli strikes have killed Iran's second supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and thousands of civilians. The justification? is that Iran was close to a bomb. But how close were they really? Because the International Atomic Energy Agency paints a very different picture. Now, what Iran did have was around 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to roughly 60%. That is not weapons grade, but it is capable of becoming it. And this is where things start to get complicated. Because just hours before the current wave of strikes, Oman's foreign minister revealed a breakthrough, even appearing on American TV to announce it. So why would the US bomb a country it was on the verge of winning against at the negotiating table? And while America may have achieved its supposed immediate goal, political scientists who study strikes like these are clear. Bombing a state doesn't remove the desire for a nuclear deterrent. It strengthens it. And the evidence is already visible. Since 2020, China has gone from roughly 250 warheads to over 600. Finland has in recent weeks lifted a nuclear ban it had held since the 1980s. And the United States, the self-declared enforcer of non-proliferation, says it wants to resume nuclear testing for the first time since 1992. So the question we started with was simple. Could these strikes end Iran's nuclear ambitions? The evidence suggests something very different. They may have done the opposite, and not just for Iran, but for the world.
Let's pick up where Sarah left off and ask our guests to weigh in on Iran's nuclear ambitions. Joining us now from Istanbul is Borso Daragahi, longtime foreign correspondent and author of the newsletter Battalions at borso.substack. Also with us is Ibrahim Al-Marashi, international security analyst, joining us from Samarkand in Uzbekistan. First to you, Borso. Conflicts in the Middle East are no longer about missiles and large armies. How much have drones, cyber attacks, and proxy groups changed the balance of power?
Well, I think they've changed the balance of power a considerable bit, especially when it comes to strategies of warfare. We saw that in Ukraine with the much stronger Russians running into a quagmire when confronted with the more creative yet less powerful Ukrainians who came up with these strategies. Iranians studied those strategies. They did their homework, and they've been using those strategies against the Americans, against American allies and partners in the region. We used to consider drones something of a nuisance on the battlefield, something that people would laugh about. They were much more powerful in terms of surveillance, and also the sort of larger, more powerful, and much more expensive combat drones that the U.S. uses. But what we see in both Ukraine and Iran is the use of these basically multiple sources of power, including electricity, fiber optics. In the case of Hezbollah in Lebanon, these small suicide drones really making a difference, becoming much more than a nuisance, but becoming a strategic tool.
Are we now seeing a blur between conventional and non-conventional warfare?
Absolutely. This is under the same paradigm of hybrid warfare. The blurring of the conventional and the non-conventional ultimately means that there's a new asymmetry in conflict. Somebody could dominate the skies through drones that are cheaply made. Somebody can dominate cyberspace. And as a result, the conventional arsenal ensured a superpower's dominance is no longer a guarantee of success. Ukraine or in Ukraine versus Russia or Iran versus the U.S.
That's an important point, and let me take that point to Borso now. We are seeing relatively cheap technologies challenge major military powers. Does this mean smaller states and non-state actors now have much greater influence in war?
Well, I'm not sure, and I think that that remains to be seen. I think that's one variable, but another variable in both Ukraine and Iran is geography. You know, they say geography is determinant in these conflicts, and the fact is that when you are an invading force, when you are an attacking force, you are inherently at a disadvantage And in the case of Iran, for example, it is a very mountainous country that makes it very ideal for this kind of hybrid warfare because they're well hidden away inside various crevices in the country. In the case of Iran, I would say rather than it's a combination of both these new types of warfare, this kind of hybrid warfare that Dr. Marashi was talking about, as well as this geographical factor, and it's probably the geography is more significant.
I'll request both of our guests to stay on. Let me bring in my colleague Talat joining us from Lahore. He is, of course, hosting the show for SAMAA TV. Talat, over to you. Ask a question to our panel of guests here.
If you could reflect on the future combination of offensive and defensive weapons, because we started off with nukes and we are discussing low-end drones as well. Is there going to be a combination that will guarantee national security? Will it vary from country to country, region to region? You mentioned geography as well. So I'm just trying to understand, is there going to be the ideal fit that if you have this combination, this range of weaponry, this range of technology, you are okay in a world that is really chaotic?
I mean, on one level, one hopes it serves as a cautionary tale in that if Iran could put up such a robust defense, perhaps it will put on the brakes on future warmongering. It demonstrates that even if you think you have a more conventional military advantage, there's that so-called phrase, the fog of war, and that when the actual combat emerges, you can never anticipate the outcomes. And so, one would hope from a normative perspective, the Iran case would be it definitely, I think, has put an end to kind of the war-making capabilities of the U.S., at least for the near term, particularly under the Trump administration. So I would say it's for the better.
Borso, now coming to you, beyond the battlefield itself, how important is information warfare and social media in shaping public opinion during conflicts?
Well, I think at this point, it's important. I think that a lot of it is very important. The social media issue is very important right now. For Israel, it's very important. For the U.S., it's very important. And for Iran, it's been very important in this particular war. The shaping of perceptions, especially for a country like in the case of Iran or in the case of Vietnam during the U.S. invasion, the shaping of perceptions globally and in the enemy country is crucial and vital. And Iran has been able to utilize the lessons of the past as well as some creative new tools such as AI with these Lego videos and clever tweets from its foreign ministry and so on to shape the perception in the U.S. that Iran was this innocent country that was attacked unprovoked. It has likened the war to one waged by the Epstein class, an unjust war. It has tied its cause to that of the civil rights movement in the U.S. And these are lessons from the past. Ho Chi Minh employed similar strategies in getting the United States to back out of Vietnam and to create division inside the United States at the time of the war. So in this particular instance, it's very important. But it should be also said that, for the U.S., they don't care. I don't think that the U.S. government, it went to war with a very poor strategy, very poor social media strategy. It is not winning the social media war. It is not winning the battle of perceptions because it sort of stumbled into this conflict, and it's basically the ego of one man that's keeping it in the conflict.
It's an interesting point that you're sharing, that the U.S. government, the current administration, just doesn't care about perception. To you, Ibrahim, do you think Western governments and alliances have adapted quickly enough to this new kind of hybrid warfare? Because look what's happening. Russia, Ukraine, they were the first ones. That was the first one where we saw drones being exchanged. Then 2025, India, Pakistan, and now the ongoing conflict where Iran has been launching drone attacks into some Gulf states. And then there's been that crossfire of drones. So do you think that the Western governments, in a way, have not been very quick in adapting to this new hybrid warfare?
Absolutely, because when you're talking about Western governments, remember, you're talking about entrenched bureaucracies with their own interests. And by their nature, bureaucracies are always reactive. They're not proactive. So to just, follow up on Borzu's point, remember during the rise of ISIS, the State Department was tasked with creating social media messages to basically prevent youth from being seduced by ISIS's social media. And they were just awful. They were you would made fun of. Compared to the White House and their social media campaign, that hasn't compared to Iran, where in the Iranian case, a lot of the Lego videos aren't made by the government themselves, but kind of outsourced by these kind of content producers and the public, opposed to the government control. If you look at the Department of Defense in the U.S. as well, this is a bureaucracy that actually wedded to the old ways of fighting, aircraft carrier tanks, advanced aircraft, and basically bureaucracies like that weren't ready to adopt to the low-cost drone campaigns of Iran. And of course, you could say the same of Russia, that its massive bureaucracy hadn't learned the lessons from neither the Georgia War of 2008 and on the 2020 invasion of Ukraine. It failed to anticipate that these kind of low-cost drones would make the Russian military advantage almost mute.
Absolutely, you're right, Ibrahim, there. Thank you so much, Ibrahim and Borso, for really adding great perspective to this story. And with that, we have come to the end of this special 3-day simulcast between South Era Network and SAMAA TV. Wars used to end, now they evolve. Over the last few days, we have discussed so many different layers: nuclear weapons, AI, information warfare, China and the US relations, India and Pakistan, and the South Asia as a whole. That's what we wanted to bring together, use SAMAA's strengths and combine it with South Era Network strengths, and together help you viewers make better sense of the story there in Pakistan, all across South Asia, and to the entire South Asian diaspora, and for us at South Era Network, the whole global South. Over to you, Talat.
Thank you very much, Sahil. I could not have summed it up better than you have. This is exactly how it has been, a remarkable journey of learning, of reporting. I was looking at the guest list. We have touched 3 continents, and we've had 30 guests of different genre, foreign diplomats, generals, bureaucrats, analysts, social media activists, political representatives, you name it. And the topics that we covered, you named some of them, total about 12, including today's biggest story, the meeting in Beijing. Also the number of people who were involved on Sen side, on SAMAA side, and I was counting, generally speaking, about 120 people were deployed to essentially produce this transmission. Camera crew, technicians, editorial guys, researchers, all of them burnt the candle from both ends and produced this remarkable transmission. Of course, the viewers' feedback is going to tell us how remarkable it is, but I can tell you, as somebody who does only one thing, that is journalism, and I'm sure, Sahil, you do the same thing, this has been a truly path-breaking, trailblazing kind of an experience. It won't be the last of the 3 programs that you would see. This has developed into some sort of a matrix, some sort of a pilot project that has gone to the next level. And anytime the world expects us to debate important issues and bring you special insights, we shall be there, Sen and SAMAA together. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.